So, I'm sure you all have followed closely the actions of Elon Musk and Doge and Amazon and Jeff Bezos wedding this weekend. Digital sovereignty, cloud computing, all of these things, from satellites to the internet to whatever, the technology corporations that are, many of which are located in the US and in Silicon Valley, are fundamentally really, really important to the politics we see today. Especially AI. Again, I'm sure many of you, if you're in academia, have also been having these chats about the power of AI and LLMs and OpenAI. Which is opening remarks to say that we're very excited for these two speakers and hopefully a third on Zoom if that works, to engage with some of these thorny questions. So maybe I'll turn to my co-chair if you wanted to say any introducing remarks before.
Yeah, thank you very much first to ECPS and all contributors, and thank you for inviting me as well for chairing this session. Well, I know this is a small part of the conference because it's a bit or quite specific topic actually, but it might be more interesting than we think, I think, because the humanity facing quite great changes and challenges coming with all these changes, especially with artificial intelligence and digitalization, automation. I think will change quite a lot our lives, our daily lives, and our future. So we hope to discuss these issues in this session. Well, thank you very much for all of you. I'll give the word to...
Should we have our online speaker go first or last, do you think? Should we have... So maybe we'll try our online... He's just... Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Okay. That's disappointing. Okay. Well, it was an excellent paper, and maybe I'll send my thoughts, or maybe address some thoughts on it then. So maybe then we'll go to Lana, talking about navigating digital disruptions, the ambiguous role of digital technology, state foundations, and gender rights. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I think I need to. So thank you for the organizations for inviting me to present this paper today. This paper is an ongoing project. It's part of my research as a Marie Curie Fellow at the University Oberta de Catalunya in Spain. And basically what I want to talk today is about the female exclusion from the concept of people and how this has been increased by technology. So first I will present how this digital age has been impacting in the three elements of the state, the traditional elements, territory, state, and people. Then trying to connect these ideas with the exclusion from the concept of people, and later trying to demonstrate how this tech elite has been in a conversation with illiberal ideologies, and the result of this is the maintenance of women away from the concept of people. So digital transformations have been affecting states' foundations. All elements, sovereignty, territory, and people have been redefined. Cross-border data flows challenges territory and its traditional idea of physical borders and military control. This also impacts sovereignty, governmental power, in an uninterritoriality concept of data. The establishment of a digital sovereignty also allows the sharing of sovereignty power with private tech companies who are able to detect rules, policies, politics, and affect people's lives. As a solution, some scholars have advocated for the disconnection between sovereignty and territory in a way to protect sovereignty. But even the use of extraterritorial principles, as we already do in international law, to protect citizens overseas and guarantee legal compliances has been challenging. One example is the US and EU agreements about GDPR legal enforcement in US. The three agreements have been failed, and we already saw this in the Screamers case 1 and 2nd, where GDPR legal enforcement failed in face the US surveillances. Oh, sorry. So data fragmentation promoted by technology also challenged the concept of people, not just in the legal enforcement in protecting citizens abroad, but also in creating the divisible individuals, fragmented identities of ourselves. Regarding it, the digital order, despite its claims of neutrality, encapsulated in data existing social dilemmas. One of them is women's exclusion from the concept of people. Olympic Ghosts already denounced it, and century after century, women are excluded from this concept. And the digital age exacerbated this. Through social media platforms that become tools for spreading gender disinformation, gender-based violence, and sexual harassment. Tech companies, mainly controlled by white men from Silicon Valley, are designed under patriarchal norms, perpetuating this sexism and gender stereotypes. With the use of the tech industry dedicated to collect, track, and analyze female intimate data, this scenario of undermining women's rights have been impacting our more private matters. What is FanTech? FanTech is a tech industry mainly capable to collect every single aspect of females' lives. We can have these FanTechs, for example, the menstruation track apps, and for who are not familiar with it, in this kind of applications, women inserting a lot of information about your menstruation, your period, your ovulation, and your sexual activities. These apps, the idea behind these apps is to promote female empowerment, because you'll know better your body. You'll know when your cycle is coming, or why you are not in a good mood this day because of your period. This kind of apps also can share this information if you are a partner, if you want to. And the problem with this kind of technologies is that they have been increasing this control over women's bodies, allowing the use of FanTech data against women in the context of anti-abortion laws. And here we have the example that started in US after the overturning of Roe versus Wade. A lot of information from this kind of applications have been using as proof against women in criminal cases in states where now abortion is illegal. This has been happening since 2023 because the regulation was overturned in 2022. And this year, the same practice of using this data as proof in criminal cases against abortion is also a practice from the UK police. They launch some kind of directories, some kind of guidelines on how to make searches on phones using the data that women are putting in these apps. And then, based in a law, a legislation from the 19th century, they are able to criminalize these women. So this scenario have been undermining women's rights and impacting the most private matters. This started in USA, as I told, and has been spread from other countries. The use of this kind of data from fintech apps against women's rights also have been affecting the labor market, because most of companies are promoting the use of this kind of apps from these employees so they can have the access of this kind of information. And this has been impacting women's rights to be promoted in the workplace, because your boss knows when or if you want to become pregnant, and this can impact your labor rights. This also has been perpetuating gender stereotypes in social media advertisements through no-consent data sharing with third-party companies like Facebook. I will not tell the name of the app, but from 2016 to 2019, this app was sharing the information with Facebook and other companies dedicated to create advertisement profiles. This was investigated by the Federal Commission from the US, and they end the story with an agreement between the company and the regulators that only said that they have to notify women that this data might be or not being shared with these companies. In practice, what this means? This means that if you have this kind of app and this data was shared with this kind of companies, you will start to receiving a lot of advertisement about pregnancy, motherhood, childhood, and including, in some cases, the app knows, and all these advertisements companies knows about your pregnancy before your relatives, because they already have the information. So the concept of people that is, since the beginning, deeply tied with gender, sexuality, family, and reproduction. And this is why we have so many regulations about females' bodies. In this context, tech elites works in alliance with far-right ideologies, disseminate gender rhetorics. In an unregulated business, they rebrand the traditional family values in a neutral space to develop their agenda far away from any criticism and any regulation. Using gender as a symbolic glue, they amplify illiberal ideologies to constrain more recent women's rights achievements. The use of gender as a symbolic glue allows that the tech business remains unchallenged by regulation. Zuckerberg's recent call for a masculine energy in the tech field is a handshake to Trump's administration. Connect them against us. So what once was unlocked in ambiguity is now become increasingly explicitly. The digital infrastructure is not neutral. It is the maintenance of patriarchal values in favor of the exclusion of women from the concept of people. To conclude, it is time to challenge this neutrality discourses from digital technologies and recognize they work in anti-gender debates that remain women and other marginalized people far from the concept of people. So, thank you.
Next. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Our next speaker will be Matilda Bufano on the role of AI in shaping the people, big tech, and the bro-oligarchy's influence on modern democracy.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the insightful conversations we had before lunch and during lunch, and that probably we'll have after this kind of pessimistic outlook compared to the ones that we had this morning. So apologies in advance for the grim presentation. But it's the state of the world, so don't blame me. Yet, I guess. We live in a dangerous time for democracy. We live in an interesting time research-wise, and we have tackled that this morning, and we will do in the following days of the conference. But what I really want to stress is that we have to do something about the state of democracy we're in as citizens, and not only as politicians, but democracy as us, and them, but also us. So I want to actually give a more practical presentation compared to some theoretical ones we had this morning, kind of linking back to the opening remarks that we made this morning about how our research can also impact policy. And as a practitioner, in the past year, I have seen a lot of lack of communication between academia and practice, but we can't fight for democracy if we're divided. The 2020 marked kind of a starting of an era that has been simmering for a while. We were closed in our houses because of COVID, conflicts re-erupted, and we relied on tech. We always did, but we relied on tech too much, and that changed our perception of it. Politicians and voters all use their social media for life or for their jobs, and their social media feed was impacted by what they did, but also they impacted it, what we saw and what they saw. And this is algorithmic curation. But of course, as most technologies, this doesn't only come from a neutral perspective. It fuels disinformation and conspiracies and effective polarization, practically damaging the democracies we're in. And this has to be linked, and I will get there at the end, with the rising trend from the beginning of the year and the rise of the oligarchy that was already established as tech giants in Silicon Valley have been an entity in our society for a while, but their interlinkages with the government have definitely grown in the past year. But before that, as I just briefly already mentioned, I want to say why I'm presenting this paper and why I conducted this research. I am not a political scientist. My background is the one of an international lawyer, but I am also chronically online. And I know the damages that I see online impact my work and perception of things I see on international law and international criminal law and the disinformation on it. And suspension of fact-checking in a period where conflict was preponderant has been a damage to our society as polarization and disinformation on crimes going on, but also democracies in the West kept on growing. And as a European citizen, I am very fond of the new laws that have been passed, like the Digital Services Act, that encourage platforms to enact legislation that calls for transparency and accountability for platforms. But unfortunately, that is only limited to the EU, and this problem is a global one. So I will now go into the nitty-gritty of the paper in itself that aims to understand how social media infrastructures widen the gap between us and them, and what is politics currently not doing it to safeguard it. But a technical introduction to begin with. So we have two types of algorithms that I will be talking about. And one is algorithmic curation, and the other is algorithmic moderation. And they are both part of what we see every day when we open our phones. So algorithmic filtering, is defined as the selection of content done by a precise code that is inherent to the platform itself, sorting through billions of posts. This code should be neutral. It is not, but we can't blame it. It's what platforms need to function. If everyone in this room started posting right now, or scrolling through the platforms, we would need to see different content for the platforms not to be overburdened. And we should also remember that big tech are businesses, and they need to increase their clients and revenues, and that is done by providing us entertainment that we like. Because if I'm seeing something that I don't like, I'm getting out of the platform, not spending time on ads or anything that could bring value, economically speaking, to the platform in itself. From a social perspective and a political perspective, what is interesting is that we are sorted into bubbles that like our same entertainment, and by engaging in those bubbles, we see that our opinion and our thoughts are valued, and that also triggers something that gives us a positive feedback and wants to stay on the platform in itself. That is not only entertainment, but it's identity-related gratification. And this creates kind of a problem, because if we think that algorithmic filtering can be of two types, collaborative and content-based, we keep looking for that content until we are biased and not objective anymore. And that, on a political level, of course, becomes quite a danger. So collaborative filtering is the type of filtering where content is based on characteristics that are presumed from our demographic characteristics. So for instance, white cis males that are 60 years old with no college degree will be presumed to be conservatives, even if they've never interacted with that content. At the same time, content-based filtering presumes that if a user has liked that type of content before, so if a conservative has liked racist content, for instance, they will keep being shown that. And even if it's in different ways, in the first one, we are shoved into a bubble, and then with the gratification that I was mentioning earlier, we started liking that bubble in itself, and that changes the way we see the world. Those bubbles are filter bubbles, also called echo chamber in research. There are subtle, tiny differences. I picked filter bubbles because they are a more specific term linked to the role of AI and algorithms in this mechanism. And they are bubbles, so enclaves that group citizens and users that have shared interests and beliefs. And prima facie, that is not a problem, because if I like pizza and someone else likes pizza, then we can talk about pizza together. But if I'm racist online and another person is racist online, I'm not going to change my mind about other people. I'm probably going to start dehumanizing them. And this is the issue that comes with group isolation or belief homophily that is, of course, aggravated by our constant reliance on social media, algorithms, and the lack of moderations that now come with it. So as I said, these bubbles are not only fed information, but also disinformation. And disinformation, when we see at the dynamics that we can have with us and them grouping, are mainly 90% of the disinformation we see is constructed on hating another group. So we can hate a group that we can come into contact with. So take, for instance, a Facebook group from your village. And this happened where I live, and during COVID, a lot of people blamed the Asians in the neighborhood for the pandemic. In other places, that could be taken to a general level, so they could not come into contact with the people they blamed for taking the virus, but they blamed a whole group within their nation. This comes under the big umbrella that is outgroup derogation, so associating an outgroup with unfavorable traits that often leads to hate and, in worst cases, violence. And the direct opposite of it, instead, is in-group glorification, and we see it with the white supremacy movements that are going on right now. So seeing their group as superior and, most importantly, a legitimate authority that deserves to be respected. But the following step to disinformation, because of course in those bubbles we are fed the content and that gets always taken to an extremist level, is phantom mastermind blaming. That sounds a bit pompous, but if I call it conspiracy theories, people will know what I'm talking about. So conspiracy theories and disinformation have kind of the same features, because there's the same thing, just taken to an extreme level. So both are very spreadable, and that the algorithm likes. Because if I see that a content is popular, I think people love to engage with it, and people believe it, and people spend more time on my platform, and I gain money from that. So I keep pushing it. And people that are already media literate or that are vulnerable, because that is what we're talking about now with conflicts, pandemics, economic recessions, the blame always falls, in most cases, especially on minorities and on vulnerable groups. So this leads to kind of a derogation and in-group glorification that is hard to reverse. Because if we're feeling gratified and we have a positive feedback, we don't want to get outside of the bubble. So what are the risks of it? Well, the main risks is that democracy is not made to think everyone the same thing, so it's nice that we have some cleavage between us and them, but that should only limit itself at ideological polarization, not effective polarization. Because if I disagree with someone and I engage in dialogue like it ideally happens if we're not closed into that filter bubble, we can also agree to disagree and vote different parties. But if effective polarization takes place, I will actively hate the other person and associate it with features and characteristics then induce me to delegitimize that person, leading to violence, exclusion from polling, and in the worst cases, fueling conflicts and genocides like we have seen in Myanmar, for instance. So these are the internal problems that the algorithms cater to the us and the them create. But from a another perspective that is the one from external risks, it also provides disaggregation. Because if we have an external risk that is, for instance, foreign information and manipulation interference ahead of elections, if we are disaggregated and I trust everything that I see online and I believe that I should blame that particular group, if an external actor exploits that weakness, I will believe the external actor and give them a way inside my society to actually fracture it. And we have seen it, for instance, in Romanian elections with Russian disinformation on various large platforms. So what do we need? We need some moderation, but that has been the main change that led me to write this paper to begin with. Because after Trump's re-election, 80% of fact-checking in the US has been dismantled, and that had repercussions also in Europe, like Spain, for instance. So algorithmic moderation is one of the ways that we can have fact-checking done both by crowdsourced sources, natural language processing, and fact-checkers. And it's screening user-generated content to determine appropriateness or, well, if it's hate speech, basically. So is it to blame? Well, it's not like we have to blame the pro-oligarchy, but that's a phenomenon that has been increasingly concerning. So pro-oligarchy is a portmanteau of pro and oligarchy, pointed to a close group of tech billionaires capable of influencing politics. And that is kind of what we've been seeing. And that is what changed from big tech to pro-oligarchy in itself, is that this inherent presence in the government allows us to link, possibly, that media should be objective and should lead citizens to make unbiased decisions. But this is not what we've seen, because if we don't have control over what we're seeing, which is what happens with algorithms, then, you know, who's accountable for that? And, oh my God, I touched the wrong, okay. So moving forward, what do we need to do? As I mentioned at the beginning, at the European level, we have legislation that is very, very new and still trying to be implemented. That is the Digital Services Act, the DSA, that attempts to minimize the risk of propagation by adopting safe and transparent practices, including moderating recommender systems. And right now, AI is a kind of a black box, so user can't see why they're being targeted by specific content. And that would change it, if enforced correctly. And that should be expanded worldwide to have at least a court to hear the opinion of the tech platforms in themselves and why they aid certain content to be published. Because after Elon Musk's purchase of X, there was a 50% increase in the weeks after that purchase of hate speech, because moderation was shut down. Then we come to the moderation part, because if the pro-oligarchy is in charge of that, then what should we do? We should take a step back and remember that we don't only exist online. Media literacy is important to understand both offline and online content, and debunking techniques as well. We need to be rational in our thinking and don't expect algorithms to do everything for us. And of course, this should also come with content moderation and fact-checking, but we should really reconsider what we do offline. So to finish, I hope hopefully on time, and understand how social media infrastructures have widened this gap, well, filter bubbles and the lack of moderation surely came into play together. And right now we are trying, the EU is trying, and we should all try to remember that what we see online is not necessarily true. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for two excellent presentations, lots to discuss there. So maybe we'll say some comments and then give you time to respond and go to the floor. Did you want to go begin? Or?
Thank you very much, Mathilde. It was a great presentation, actually. Maybe it would be great if we had some other notions related to pro-oligarchy, for example, like techno-oligarchy and techno-feudalism. I don't know, you heard about 2 years ago, Greek former Minister of Economy Yanis Varoufakis published a book titled Techno-Feudalism. He talks about the huge change on the industrial society and our liberal democracy that we were living. And
he mentioned that we couldn't change the capitalist system, but the system itself, it's changed itself, transformed to a new capital and societal and political system, which refers to the old feudalism, but based on the shrinking welfare and capital from the society. Briefly, he means that now developed countries shrink the whole welfare and capital from the poor or undeveloped countries, and in another way, the rich people inside countries do the same thing to other people. And that means we are really living in a new era, in a new society, which is completely different than the capitalist society, and instructions and institutions all changed. That's why Mathilde called this broligarchy. This broligarchy creates or means kind of new techno elites which decide for all of us. We think that now we are kind of free people and have rights, but actually, if we think deeply, we cannot affect the system and the government. The decision-making process are now all made by techno-oligarchs, bro-oligarchs, and to give just an example of Elon Musk, which participated to Trump's election and then intervened Germany's affairs or political issues. You can see this picture more clear, maybe. And after this short introduction, maybe if you have any question to our presenter, that will be great. Yeah, thank you very much.
Maybe I'll say some things, and then
Yeah,
you guys
that's
can respond,
Yeah,
and then we'll do
that's
audience,
great, yeah.
since we have extra extra time. So thanks so much for the presentations, and then for those remarks. There was a lot to kind of dig in. So maybe I'll do some kind of broad kind of questions and themes that came up for me reading all three of your papers, and then listening to, and then that might be something to dig in or spark more conversation. So the first is kind of related to sort of your remarks, what you were saying. I think one of the things that's really, it's captured in the broligarchy term, but your paper was also talking about the.
Sorry, I just
That's okay. No, sorry. I was like,
second look in.
I'm tripping while sitting. Political power is located somewhere we're not used to. So it's not in government, it's in corporations, it's in businessmen, oligarchies, and this is kind of complicating our traditional understandings of how democracy should be protected through the state. So I wonder, for you both, how thinking about like corporate power and economic power historically works. So the question I kind of had for all three papers really was, is there something distinctive about the social media companies that really separates them from forms of traditional media? And, because the questions you're talking about, the themes you guys are talking about polarization, about democracy, are really questions about power. Yeah. Who's in power? Who gets to tell information? How do you do this? So is there a difference between these filter bubbles and just saying like there's one newspaper in town because that's the newspaper that's in town and they get to decide? And then there's this, and that's kind of an early modern kind of historical thing. We could think 20th century, but in the discussions around like digital sovereignty and corporate power too, I was even thinking broader than that. So I think, Luana, I think this is your paper talking about digital sovereignty and the way that these corporations sort of escape traditional state regulation because they go across borders, they're in the cloud, they're digital, we can't quite grasp them. But, you know, I was a historian in a past life, and things like the British East India Company or the Dutch East India Company had the, you know, or even companies in empire had the same problems too, that they, you know, they're operating in India, but then they're headquartered in, or South Africa or something, you know, they're headquartered in the state, and the UK, and the British government says, no, don't do that, and they're like, no, you know, we are doing it, but then they don't, you know, so again, so is there something distinctive here about the corporations, kind of historically and in a kind of early modern sense? And then the second question I had, and this goes back to, I really like the gendered framing that both of you really brought to it, because I think it highlights a lot of issues. And one of the questions was about the intentionality. So I think, like, you know, for both of you, there was a kind of latent critique of the men who were in charge, as well as the structures that enable their power. And that again seems to me a sort of differentiation you could pull out as well. That some of the things like the period tracking apps, it seems like very obvious, like how they're you know, they're very clearly going to be used as a form of gendered social control. But in the overturning of Roe v. Wade, we saw lots of technological infrastructure that may, you know, things like Facebook Messenger, right, where they're handing over non-encrypted data to law enforcement, you know, which shows them, you know, trying to get abortion pills, which are in violation of the law. So in that sense, the messenger, or the infrastructure itself, which is a messaging platform, it's not that it was constructed in a certain way, but it's that Mark Zuckerberg changed his mind and was like, actually, Facebook is going to collaborate with this new state, with this new policy to either something he truly believes or following. So I wonder then, is there you know, is there a infrastructural or structural critique, and then is there a personal critique of the political power that these individual men and CEOs have? Because we saw it with Trump 2.0 administration, that many of these guys who were like, oh, no, we're liberal, we love Obama, all of a sudden we're like, no, we're going to line up at the Trump administration. So it seems like they changed their mind, and that then their content moderation changed. And then I guess the third maybe theme to discuss is this question of, and I think this is something that comes up when we frame specifically about democracy too, and the power of tech, is the question of the public square, the question of like informational content moderation, that you all were talking about, and how it relates, I guess I want to say, to power, because there seems to be a couple of themes. There seems to be a misinfo or a disinfo or informational problem and a power problem. So one question I have is disinformation worse than it was in the past? So David Runciman's equally depressing book, How Democracy Ends, has a line or an argument in there that says, actually, belief in conspiracy theories have stayed relatively constant throughout history. And if that is the case, does it matter that these platforms are my crazy aunt logs on is like, ooh, a new conspiracy theory, lizard people. You know, if democracy was established, expanded, has survived or been adopted with this. So when does it matter? And I think there was also, related to that, there's this question of, I think, again, both of you engaged with it, of information and mobilization. So the platforms themselves seem to, they both seem to spread information, which might be a top-down or bottom-up approach, which is a problem, but then they also seem to connect people. So the question of like whether you're serving white supremacist content, or whether you're like, hey, these are the 20 local white supremacists in your area, you should meet up, seems to be two different but related problems. And then the final one relating to that is kind of like more prescriptive, and where you see, it's kind of where democracy is located. Because I think, again, for both of you, it seems, and the third paper as well, I should say, democracy and politics in some sense is located in the state, it's located in the governments. And can we bring democracy to these platforms? And something that I don't think any of the papers did, but which might be an interesting example to bring in is the case of Wikipedia, where, you know, part of the reason that, you know, you're critiquing like this moderation doesn't get it right. Mark Zuckerberg can flip the moderation if he wakes up on a bad day and is like, actually, you know, actually I've changed my mind. I'm progressive now. I like a Green New Deal, and all of a sudden Facebook changes for everyone around the world. But you can't do that on Wikipedia because of the architecture of the platform itself, that it is in a way democratic, you know, not to say that there's not a power relationship, obviously gender, racial issues in terms of both how the community relates to itself and how information is spread. But actually, you know, people come together, they argue, there's conflict. People say, you know, the stat is always Wikipedia is more accurate than, you know, expert encyclopedias. So is there a way of locating, rethinking also too about where we locate democracy? So sorry, that might be a lot. There's enough there in all of our comments for you to go on for some time, but I think we have some additional time, so there's no rush.
Very well, great.
I don't know if either of you want to start.
Yes, I did note them down, but I think they also relate one to the other, so I will just have a little overarching comment, if that is all right. So I will start with, I think the first question you ask is the difference between traditional and new media. Well, what I think is not necessarily in the reach they have, but the practice that they have to follow. Can you all hear me, by the way? I'm quite far from the microphone. Should I? Yeah, right. Sorry about that. So the difference between the two is the accountability that they can have, and the fact that one is more democratic than the other in its practice and its accessibility. So I'll take, for instance, the conflict in Gaza. Newspapers have standards that they ought to abide to when they do coverage on conflicts. That doesn't happen on social media if we don't have content moderation, because everyone can say whatever they want, technically. And who is responsible if hate speech is posted on whatever very large platform or search engine that we have? Whereas if disinformation or hate speech is published in a newspaper, we can reach the author of the article or the newspaper and have some sort of accountability with that, or at least a dialogue on asking, why did you write this, and limit the spread that it has. Because that is the second point, actually. Comparatively, newspapers reach those who want to read them. New media reaches everyone, because that type of, and especially if it's a bad article, because we presume that if it's a very biased one, it's not a good article by journalistic standards, it gets critiqued more than appreciated. If it's online and people just passively scroll through that, it becomes amplified, and eventually it will hit someone that believes that article and will not critique the standards and will not even think of holding that journalist accountable. And that problem with accountability actually links back to the other issue that we were talking about, because it's not only hard to reach those platforms with accountability, and we see that also with European legislation, it's also because they are kind of an entity under the law. They're not your local newspaper. In which court do you kind of attempt to find one of the platforms, because that is how you get them on an economic level. They're businesses. So that is the problem, and I don't think it's very different from other corporations, because they violate human rights just the same, just in different ways. Like other big corporations that damage the Amazon forest or engage in what is called modern-day slavery, then we have to hold them accountable, but it's hard under international law, because how are they located? And they should respect principles of due diligence, but it's kind of an empty promise as well. And maybe I will stop there if Luana wants to say something, then goes to the other.
Yeah, I think that we are going from the same way, but I think that there is something related to this topic and trying to unite all the questions. That is the platform design. The way they are designed is a way to facilitate this kind of communication. Everyone can speak in this kind of platforms, but also in the platform design, we also have this, and make this distinction between social media and traditional media. We have this kind of capacity to manipulate behavior, because through the algorithms, they know us more than we know ourselves. So it's very easily to put out there something that sometimes the person itself don't realize it. For example, this kind of misogynic perspectives and views of thinking. And also, these platform designs also impacts in this kind of digital sovereignty because they work without borders. They don't need, and they can jump from a jurisdiction to another with no business problem to them. They don't lose anything. And we are trying to find answers for this in the traditional way without understanding that they are not playing the game in the traditional way. They are changing the rules of the game. And I think that when you are talking about this idea of capitalism, that we change capitalism, this is the base of capitalism. Capitalism survives from crisis. So you need a crisis to another to change things. And now we have a new elite. So we need to start to recognize this, the role of this man and this man, because there is no one woman in charge of these companies. And if I can go back to the platform design, women, and why this is a male infrastructure. It's not the person itself, but it's about this kind of oligarchy, this kind of brotherhood that they created. And I need to give this example from fintech. Most of fintech is developed by for women's body. Most of these apps are developed by men, and men receive more funding for developing this kind of apps than women. This is data, this is fact, this is not small talking. So why? And through this no gender perspective in a technology that is for women, we have a lot of problems that is affecting women's lives, and I can just mention one, because most of these apps are like calendars, so they have this standard procedure that women's cycles is 14 to 48 days. Okay, this is a lack of agenda in medicine as well, but it's a long conversation. This makes that women that not fit in this kind of standard have issues in using this kind of apps, and a lot of them are using as contraceptive method. So you already know what is happening in the end. So and trying to asking how this information is working in this kind of context, I think that Matilda work is the answer, because they are connecting these bubbles. Once these bubbles was spread in a lot of countries, but now they are being connected. And in Brazil, because I'm from Brazil, we have Bolsonaro. And Bolsonaro received a lot of support from Trump. Yeah. So how these guys met? So how this kind of ideas was, so it's because of this kind of ways to spread information and connect people. And why democracy, this idea that democracy is located in governments, and if we can put this kind of ideas into platforms, and if this is possible, they don't want to, because this is business. This is not a community. This is not about democracies. This is not about engaging people for better outcomes and progress. This is connecting people to remain power, money, in the hands of the same people. And this is why oligarchy, this is basically what they are doing. So, yeah, I think.
And on the gender topic they were talking about, well, as Lena correctly said, it's not a coincidence that they're all men, because the patriarchal structures that give funding to white, cis, able-bodied men is there, and we can't deny it. But I think the problem is more in the consequences rather than who they are, because they create issues for women, like it was mentioned just now, and they actively perpetuate stereotypes or hate speech against women. And it's enough to pop on Twitter right now and see the effects of the moderation being taken down, which includes AI chatbots being able to create nude pictures of women. Well, now it has been censored, luckily, but you know, with a vague prompt enough, you could sexualize a normal picture of a person. And incels community and Andrew Tate propagandas has been running rampant on those platforms. So it is a gender problem but also it's an intersectional problem because it touches women, but it also touches other minorities. And it's not because they're rich white men, but it's just because that content gets liked. So the problem is a social one, but it gets exploited. And that kind of makes it a gender type of problem. And of course, with the public square talk that we were having earlier, of course, that type of misogyny and disinformation in general was already there, and conspiracy theories were already there. But I have seen a shift of conspiracy theories being like, haha, lizard people, to QAnon and Capitol Hill. And there must have been something there that kind of took the stigma out of being a conspiracy theorist and made it actually like a social status of some sort for people. And that is because people were not scattered around and coming up with their theories or whatever conspiracy theory was there in the moment, but they came together. And of course that already happened in history, but you know, now it is propagated by some platforms that could do something about it. And if there are conspiracy theories anyway, well, we can't change all of that, but we can avoid that being facilitated. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll turn to audience questions.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, lots of hands.
I saw your hand first, so maybe I'll.
I mean, I've asked questions before.
We have one right here. Maybe we'll go there first.
Thank you very much. So I had similar questions to what Alina raised about how new this phenomenon is and how distinct it is from previous instances of corporate power, like Rupert Murdoch and people like that. But given that this has all been asked, I want to tackle the question from a different angle. And both presentations touched on this kind of retrograde gender politics of these platforms and the oligarchy, I like this term. And I was wondering, what do you see, I think Mathilde touched on it in her comments right now, the relationship between the personal politics of these individuals and the structures there. So take Musk as an example. So Musk explicitly promotes anti-trans politics, political misogyny, right-wing kind of slogans, and also kind of when both Twitter changed it in a way, so brought Trump back, so moderation. So what is the, to put it bluntly, what is the chicken and what is the egg here, right? So is this, his politics is like that because this is how these structures work, or are the structures like that because he's a right-wing person who bought these platforms? And I think in both presentations, I saw hints of pointing in each of these ways, right? So there's something about like the personalities or even like the demographics of the people who have power, as opposed to more of a structural explanation of these are the kind of platforms that promote this kind of politics. So I was wondering, this is for both presenters, if you have anything to say about that.
Well, thank you for the question. I think Musk is kind of an atypical case in this sense, because it's one that we see directly engaging in those type of content itself. And I think his personal politics came first because the platform shifted after he purchased it, but I'm not him, so I can't, pinpoint it. But on a general level, I think, and that is why I use the term oligarchy, hinting at the connection with the government in itself, because we saw Meta being super in favor of content moderation when that was what the government wanted and when that was what the world wanted. And once the politics of the government changed, platforms change as well to keep their benefits. So I think it's a structural problem in the sense that they are businesses and they need to stay afloat, and to stay afloat, they also have to respect what the trend is. And if there's governmental support on, you know, eliminating research against disinformation, as we've seen in the US, like lots of grants being suspended and fact-checking bills suspended as well, governmental offices being suspended in the matter of FEMI, then that is not personal politics, or at least it's not personal politics shining through, but it's more of business practice, I would say.
Yeah, I agree, because, and I think this is why we have Zuckerberg change his policies now, because he already understands that it's not possible to continue to be very progressive in a context when Trump is elected, and he already had his fight in the Trump's first term, and he knows what he can lose with this kind of battle. So I think the patriarchy come first, and they just using this in their favor. And that is an interesting thing that I think that is very related to this kind of rising of bro-oligarchs. And because most of these tech companies, they came from the crisis, the financial crisis from 2009. And every time that we have some kind of crisis, women's rights and minorities' rights were the first to be under attack. So I think he's very connected to this way to do business, because they already know that this can have a space and they can make money from this. So trying to end somehow is a social problem, is a social dilemma that we have. And maybe instead of talking about those guys, we have to start to talk about how to make our society more progressive and more open to minorities, and maybe in the future not being so being impacted by this kind of politics. So maybe this could be a key.
Thank you so much. That was very informative. Learned a lot. I have two quick questions to Matilda, but maybe you can also speak to this. So on the one hand, we always hear these stories about, you know, filter bubbles being bad, Cambridge Analytica having like influenced elections, right? But these are quantitative questions, right? And I just want to cite here from two meta-studies, one done by Reuters, right? And it says unreliable news, including false, deceptive, low quality or hyper-partisan news, represents a minute portion of people's informational diet. Most people do not share unreliable news. On average, people deem fake news less plausible than true news. Social media are not the only culprit. And the influence of fake news on large socio-political events is overblown, right? In the same vein, they say, well, Cambridge Analytica basically made no influence. They were just very good at, you know, selling very bad software, making a lot of money, so that they did well. But and here, I mean, just like to cite some more, echo chambers are much less widespread than is commonly assumed. Meta studies find no support for the filter bubble hypothesis, and so forth and so forth. Published in prestigious Journal of Philosophy and Technology. And I'm just wondering, because I mean, I'm just not an empirical scientist, and what do you make of this? What is our empirical basis for these claims, right, that filter bubbles are so bad? Because if filter bubbles are not so bad, we would think about, you know, control of the internet very differently. And so this is a second question. You know, I mean, on the one hand, you said, okay, we want to have fact-checking and all of these things. But then I think, there's one very good reason against fact-checking, right? Mm-hmm. And that is governments may change, right? And I really do not want to have a really good fact-checking, algorithmic technology that works very well in the hands of Trump, right? Yeah. I really don't want that. So it seems like we want to have fact-checking, right? Yeah. And we want to make it dictator-proof, right? Yeah. What are your ideas on that? Thank you very much.
I have a question. To begin with, thank you very much for the questions. When was the studies you quoted published? Just for reference.
I need to go down here.
Sorry.
The paper is from 2024.
Okay, but it's on Meta, right? It's on echo chambers on Meta or all the platforms? All, okay. Oh, Meta. Oh, sorry.
It's a Meta study, right? So the studies that are most.
Yeah. Honestly, it's quite contradictive, the research on that, and I think that is what changes between people that work on that research-wise and practice-wise, because right now I am working on fact-checking myself, and even if I've done research on this before, I am quite overwhelmed by the type of content that is published, even by trustworthy news outlets like Reuters in itself. We start to believe in it so much, and it's so subtle that it's hard to qualify it as disinformation, because sometimes we just don't know all the facts. So it becomes labeled as disinformation after. Like, take for instance the power outage in Spain. Allegations of Russian attacks were published by newspapers also in Italy, and newspapers that I personally trust and read every day, just because they didn't know better. So it is an endemic situation, not necessarily evil in that way, and it is not as weaponized as we think, and I agree with that. But it's still there. Maybe number-wise, the content is not that much, but it is really pushed by the algorithm in itself to the point that it reaches everyone. And even if people then don't post about it or reshare it, they think about it. I thought about possible Russian attack and I'm a fact checker, because especially in times of crisis, you tend to believe every information you get, especially if it's from a trusted source. So empirically, it may not be an overwhelming amount of content, especially because there's billions of posts around. But the fact that it can be there and it can have an impact, it's still worthy enough of moderation, I would personally say. And the second question you asked about echo chambers not really being a thing, I think that depends a lot on the platform. We do know about the algorithm that Meta has, and it's pretty neutral. It sponsors popular posts, but it tries to be neutral. TikTok, for instance, we don't know. It's one of the least transparent algorithms, so we don't really know the amount of echo chambers that are there. But with the Romanian elections, even if there were not many studies about the echo chambers that were there, disinformation really got spread within bubbles, and it's very hard to get out of them on some platforms. Like YouTube has been investigated for extremist content that got suggested after normal videos. TikTok now implements some more measures. So I think it kind of depends on what platforms you use. And it depends on also what they lead their study on and the time frame as well. It's very subjective.
Did you want to come in on that as well?
Yeah, I'm not so much expert in this kind of debates, but what I'm concerning about this kind of data is who is not being impacted by this fake news and etc. in kind of context, because I think this can be different from place to place, and this kind of information that Cambridge Analytica don't have so much impact. I don't know, because I'm from Brazil, and a lot of informations and elections manipulations through fake news and all these kind of things really impacted our democratic process. And we have studies that confirming this. So I don't know, it's complicated, and is some kind of criticisms as well about our studies must be a little bit more intersectionality. We need to talk with other disciplines, because this kind of phenomenon that we are facing, they mix with this kind of feelings and ideas, and how to spread and how to manipulate an opinion in each context. They know more about this than we can. So I think it's a little bit complicated. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. It's on? Okay, yeah. Thanks so much. Absolutely fascinating panel, particularly the issue of women. I was wondering whether there is some spirit of determinism a bit regarding social networks opened amazing opportunities for ordinary people to raise their voice. And suddenly, you know, during the conflicts, you hear the mushroom, these voices of peace, they mushrooming. So basically, it creates amazing opportunities for women as well. Yeah. And I was wondering, you came to conclusion that there are more disadvantages for women in the contemporary sort of digitalization than advantages. And if the digitalization is replicating the real-life structural problems, what are the women doing wrong? Or what's wrong in their tactics? What are the major obstacles? Why don't they sort of mobilize, and they're not sort of making any progress in this regard? 100 years ago, men were promoting women's rights, you know, due to their ideology, social democratic ideology, liberal ideology, out of patriotism. Even, you know, the early 20th century development in the Caucasus, for instance, men were promoting women's rights out of patriotism. They wanted their country to be as civilized as, for instance, in the West. Now we're dealing with a very interesting sort of power, bearers of power, like, you know, oligarchy, educated, extremely civilized, very knowledgeable. What's wrong? Why they're not promoting? Why they're resisting? Thank you.
Yeah.
What's wrong with the men?
Yeah, it's a very interesting, yeah.
I like it.
It is a very interesting question, and I think that it is the base of the speech today, and also the base of the work that I have been carrying with FENTECH, because it is this kind of ambiguity. Digitalization gives us a lot of voice, a lot of place for increase our democracy, to strong our connections in this kind of sense. But at the same time, we have this kind of risks. And I can use the FENTECH example again, because FENTECH is developed for women to feel a lack of knowledge about female body, because if I don't know if most of you knows about it, but in clinical trials, the standard body that they make studies is the male body. This means that, and that is a very interesting study now, because for the first time, they use a female prototype to make this kind of trials in car crash. So female body was not taken into account, and this is why the airbag sometimes is not enough to save a woman's life in a car crash. So we have these problems in medicine as well. So the FENTECH is brought as this option and this opportunity to put women in as protagonists, but still have this kind of issues. And so what we can do, I think that is being more conscious about this kind of issues. It's not stopping using digital platforms, it's not stopping using FENTECH apps, but it's knowing how this power dynamics works, and that beyond and despite all the propaganda, we still being the minority. We can half of the population, but we still being the minority. And what is happened with men? Oh God, this is a very good question, because, and this is also as part of the debate, is some kind of the politics of us, and then brings this kind of idea that we are not having so much progress because female progress. So because we have more rights now, men are losing rights. But this is a fake idea of things, because the villain here is not women, is not the minorities. The villain is the system itself. Capitalism works for this kind of things, that we lose and again, crisis and etc. So there is not a villain, a personalization of the villain, but this kind of anti-gender discourses, they have this symbolic glue, and it's difficult. And it's difficult to talk about this as well. It's not every place that we can talk about this and have a good reception, so yeah, it's not easy.
I'll be very quick. I did not intentionally, or at least it doesn't come out in my research, that social media bring about more disadvantages for women. I think, and in general, social medias are a great instrument, but we have to protect it. Everything is a good instrument in good hands. It's a systemic problems if then those algorithms are used to push discriminatory content, because that is not what they're made for, or they should not be made for. But I think giving a voice to the voiceless was the main aim of having user-generated content and everyone posting what they wanted. And I think it's a great platform for women to empower themselves, connect with other women, and create their community. So it's really good. What we need to moderate is how some people, and some men in this case, use those technologies to harm them. But that is not inherent to social media. That is a bigger problem than that.
So maybe, since we have about 10 minutes left, maybe we'll take 2 or 3 questions at a time.
There's
so someone
right. I got two quick questions.
Very quickly, maybe I'll pick. We have one down here and one hand back there, and we'll do 3 at a time.
Okay, very quick, 2 questions, really following research of some students who wrote seminar papers. First, about Brazil. I understand in Brazil the judiciary has been much more active than elsewhere in trying to regulate social media. For a while, X was banned in Brazil. Would you like to update us where this struggle is in? Number 2, is misogyny the result of social media, or is this content of social media the result of the rise of the incels, involuntarily celibate, like a low-status man who can't find female companions because of social changes, and then they just vent off their frustrations on the internet, and otherwise they would have vented off their frustrations elsewhere.
Yeah, okay, about...
Well, maybe just for time, we'll do...
Yes.
Well, there's one, and then here, and then yes, we'll have another batch.
There is a lot of...
Where do I hand
This person will transport it for you. This is mutual aid and solidarity and mic sharing.
crowd surfing.
Sorry.
Okay, I think mine is somehow connected to the previous question. Yeah, it's obvious that there is a gender issue here when it comes to digital world, but maybe it's more solution-oriented if we look at the issue from an intersectional perspective, because yeah, maybe we should just look at who is disadvantaged in this framework. For example, for young men, especially boys, now bodybuilding is something so important. It's it's going viral on the internet, and it's a huge industry. So the target is men's body in this context. So I think it's it's a gender issue, but I think it has both sides as well. Yeah.
Maybe we'll go here since.
Yeah, thank you. I've loved, almost sat on the floor there. Love the papers, love the questions, the discussion. Yeah, it's brilliant. I've got lots more questions in a way that I've come up, but I'll keep it to one, and a bit of a provocative one to both of you. The concept of proligarchy, I just find it very problematic as a term, because it seems to me very euphemistic. I mean, we're talking about billionaires, we're talking about people with media empires, people who can build rockets, people who have the ear of Donald Trump. Proligarchy to me sounds like we're mocking them, like they're losers, like they're, So I'm just wondering if, we're kind of euphemizing the threat by calling it like that rather than some other term. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but anyway, I'd like to have your thoughts. It just kind of like sits uneasily with me.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so maybe we'll take those and see if we have time for another batch. Lots of good questions for you.
Yeah. I'm trying to write all of them, but I am not the best at order. So I'll start with the latest one, with the proligarchy. I agree. There are many terms, and I welcome the suggestions that have been made earlier. It's a relatively new concept when we see that as a watershed, their entrance in the government more formally. And I think that as a term kind of underlines that, and their bro culture as well that we see with Elon Musk as well. But I totally agree, and I'm up for any other term that is less reductive and, underestimating their power in a way. I guess we can come up with a lot of terms to indicate them, but they may not be suitable for an academic paper. But I agree. There are many terms that can be used, and they're not always the best ones, but it's also something that keeps evolving, and new connotations arise, so it's hard to limit it to only a term. And calling them out all by name would be quite lengthy as well. And with the misogyny question that was asked, because I'm not an expert on Brazil, so I'll gladly leave the floor on that, and misogyny as well, because it's an interesting paper on femtech, to be honest. But I agree that misogyny was there already. We cannot blame it on social media. It would be too easy. But it kind of follows the same pattern that I've mentioned before. The fact that it gets propagated, and it's not only us in this room that are on social media, but 12, 13 years olds can fall victims to tropes and content that is not made for their age, and it can get overwhelming. So misogyny was already there, but it kind of got exacerbated by the constant, presence of it online and offline, and the lack of moderation also in society as well. It became more normalized than it once used to be. But of course, it's not only a women's problem. It touches all minorities, and it touches men as well. The bodybuilding phenomenon can get to an extremist level as other things, and not indoctrinate, but convince people that they do not fit society, and that causes whole other problems like incels, when that is factually not true, but they just get exposed to those physiques and exercises all the time, that patriarchy has an impact on them as well, because then no one feels like they fit in, and they have to respect that idealistic prototype that doesn't only impact women. That is why we need to come together against all these type of things, and not only women or not only minorities, because we are all touched by this. We're not safe.
Okay, I try to be very briefly, and I'm trying to go from the last one to the first one. So I didn't use the term oligarchy, I used tech patriarchies, but I enjoyed this term of broligarchy.
It's so hard to pronounce, to be honest.
Yeah, I know.
I mistyped it so many times.
Yes, and I tell why, because it brings this idea of brotherhood, this idea of fraternity. It's like they join in the fraternity and do whatever they want. And the universe police doesn't show up. And when they show up, they just give some money and it's okay. It's something like that, I understand the criticism, but I enjoy the term because of this. So maybe I have a lot of imagination, but the effect of affecting young men and the intersectional debate, I think, yeah, we need to also go through these kind of discussions, because in the end, it's not just gender issues, but it's reinforcement of stereotypes. And this is also young men is being affected, because it's reinforcing this kind of stereotype that this very masculine energy, and so men cannot cry, and they are absorbing this kind of patterns. And this will also goes from the idea of the incels and etc. This kind of, we are losing our masculinity because of progress and etc. And about Brazilian social media, I'm not I'm not the expert, at least I not have been following this in the last year, because I'm working in FinTech exclusively. But we have this, what is happening now of this kind of social media regulation is a tentative to make the restoration of democracy after Bolsonarism. So it's some kind of response to Bolsonarism after 4 years of, oh my God, it was terrible. And was talking about gender during these 4 years was, sometimes I thought that, oh, what I'm doing. So, and somehow in Brazil, we also have, in this polarization, also have this patriarchal element that came from colonial times. That is something that we inherit from, you know. And we are not able to be connected, make this connection with people and etc. And this, they use this very well. Bolsonaro was the first president that was very connected with social media, using these tools for integrated. No one's known Bolsonaro before. He was a congressman that knows for saying a very aggressive words against a female congresswoman. So this is what, and somehow he becomes this myth, this kind of personality, and now we need to building some kind of democratic infrastructure to undermine this, because Bolsonaro cannot be elected again, but we still have Bolsonarism, and is making a lot of damage in our government those days. So it's complicated, it's not easy. Brazil is very complex. So maybe we can chat a little bit about this later. But again, we have the interferences from social media in this kind of election process, and this came from 2014. In 2014, we have this boom of social media interferences in the election process in Brazil. Is when Dilma was running against Aécio Neves, and this later will makes the result with Dilma's impeachment. She was the first female president, and she was impeached based on misogynic debates. So, and here we are, and this open space for Bolsonaro in the end. So now we are trying to restore democracy again, and I don't know how much more we need to do, but yeah.
Okay, well that brings us to exactly 3:31, so you'll have to find our panelists in the break and ask them your excellent questions. Any concluding?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.